Hello, I am Reyda Taylor. I am an Executive Fellow with the Fuse Corps, and I'm based in Travis County, which kind of surrounds the Austin area. For those of you who haven't heard about Fuse Corps, I've got some Fuse Corps folks here in the front row. I highly recommend talking to them. So the Fuse Corps works with local governments to identify a key challenge or issue and scale a project to especially address equity issues, systemic racism, and income-related inequities. So highly recommend checking out that organization. They offer year-long fellowships. And I am working with Travis County, and we are working on a community-driven needs assessment to better understand digital inequities in the area to lead to a strategic plan for the county. And we're partnering with the city, have city folks here too, City of Austin folks. I want to ask a quick question. How many of you are data science? Like you would consider yourself a data scientist? Okay. Oh, I see some of those hands. I'm not a data scientist. I'm a researcher. I consider myself more of like a methodologist. Mixed methods and qualitative especially, although I definitely do some quantitative stuff. What I really love is just research and the power of using it to tell stories and to better understand the needs of folks and how to create solutions. So that's my passion. And while I don't bring a tool, I'm excited about checking out some of these tools though, to share. What we're doing is we're really trying to use tools like these and others to better understand what's going on in our communities and work with the folks in those communities to identify solutions together and co-design and co-interpret that data too. So we'll share a bit more about that in a little bit, but I'll go ahead and hand it over.
Awesome, thank you so much. So first question I have is, how do you all use these publicly available data sources to learn about households that are not fully online? So like what kind of questions do you ask that relate to that, and how do you use data sources to answer those questions?
Go ahead. All right, I'll go. All right, so we've been using public data, lots of different sources to really better understand Travis County as a whole, and then also understand geographically where we know there are disproportionate rates of folks affected by digital inequities. And the two sources we've really been using are the Digital Divide Index. Highly recommend checking that out. Roberto Gallardo was on a panel yesterday talking, and at Purdue, he helps develop that tool. We've also been using a lot of American Community Survey data, which we just analyze ourselves. We go pull it and have all those Excel documents, like that, and do all the work crunching things. But we've also been using tools in GIS that are already mapped with some of that data. And what we've done is we've been calling our data advocacy tour for the past 6 months. And we've been looking at data from those different sources to build out profiles in different zip codes, and to some degree even census tracts, to identify and to communicate where inequity is really happening, seeing it at the income level, seeing it as far as race and ethnicity, and also different tools. We used Microsoft Airband data as well to see what they were predicting speeds were, lots of different stuff. And we use that data to help communicate to local leaders, this is what's going on in the area where you're supporting folks or the group you're trying to support. And then also taking that back to community members and trying to understand, what do they want to tell us with this data? What does this mean? So we've been using that on kind of this tour for the past 6 months. We've also used that data, especially the DDI data and some of the ACS data, the American Community Survey data, to identify census tracts where we would like to prioritize data collection, where we're doing our own surveys and focus groups, and then community outreach. So we've been able to see that on GIS, and what is really cool about some of this data for us in Travis County is it really clearly shows the historical redlining that happened historically, where there's this 1928 master plan, that's what it was called, and that segregated the city, and communities of color were pushed to the east side beyond I-35. And you can see, literally, with internet subscription rates, the census tracts showing up, and it's just modeled exactly on what's often called the Eastern Crescent in Austin. And so we've been able to use that to communicate and advocate for why digital access and digital tools and things like that are so important for folks working in different sectors, whether it's healthcare or education, being able to communicate the importance of that with that larger data set. Now, we're going into communities to work with them to also design data collection strategies to better understand those needs on a very local level, because we know that larger data is missing a lot. And so in order to be able to not only better understand the challenges that are going on, we also want to be able to communicate those challenges and support and identify folks who want to be leaders in that space too, neighborhood leaders, community leaders. So we're using the data that way as well.
Thank you all. Yeah, and I feel like a few of you touched on like the gaps in the data and the kind of barriers that you run into. So I was wondering, for each of you, could you identify one gap that's given you pain and how you worked around it? And also maybe if you know any promising data sources on the horizon that'll help kind of fill that gap too. Anyone?
Yeah, and I agree with all of the things that were just said, and I think I'm going to give an example of something very specific. So in the American Community Survey, you can estimate subscription rates, and but you don't know the answer to why the rates may be different in that kind of data, or at least in the way we can use it. But and that's often the question that's asked when we share data. Well, we know there's no access in this area based on ACS 2021 5-year estimates, all of these things, but why? And so in Austin, Travis County, which is growing very fast, has an affordability challenge, there are lots of questions about the why in specific areas. And using that data, though, can be very powerful, especially with folks who know some of these challenges that the community is dealing with and engaging with. So one example from the American Community Survey is that subscription rate data. We have a number of different zip codes. As I mentioned earlier, we built profiles around to try and communicate challenges that areas may have. One thing we like to do is we compare a few different zip codes. One where we know it's like 86% subscription rate in one particular zip code. Low device ownership, definitely income inequality when it comes to subscription rates, things like that in that data. And then we compare it to another zip code that has very similar subscription rates, low subscription rates. But for folks who live in the area, they know that one of those zip codes is essentially on a large R1 university campus or right next to it. So there's lots of students. Now, if we were to go to try and identify solutions for these two different zip codes, one being in an area where there's lots of income inequality, that's probably going to be different solutions, and working with people in those communities are going to require different engagement strategies and solutions, and different stakeholders engaged in each section. But that data is super powerful, one, to be able to communicate that, and then especially to communicate, oh, these are two different places that have the same, very similar, at least, rates of subscription, but completely different ways that we're going to need to work to increase those rates. And some, they may already have access. We just don't necessarily know the why. So
that's great. Thank you so much for all that elaboration. So I have like a few specific questions, but feel free to hop on if you have any thoughts. So Justin, you touched on like speed test data, and I know speed tests have been kind of around and like as a way to like supplement these gaps in FCC data. Like what are the real rates that people are getting at their homes? So I was wondering if you could touch on like what are the challenges, what are the advantages, disadvantages of speed test data and employing that on a large scale? That's awesome, thank you so much. And Reyda, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, you say you go on these like tours around the county doing advocacy, and I was wondering if you could touch on how you use like quantitative versus qualitative data, like when is it useful to use one versus the other in your work?
Yeah, well, I think I'm a hand talker, so I get when I have this mic. There's so many different ways to use both, and as I mentioned, I am not a data scientist. Folks often think I am, and I get called a data scientist, and I go, well, I'm an anthropologist and I do a whole lot more qualitative work. So the storytelling and the qualitative data collection, especially the mixed methods part where you work with both types of data, is really exciting to me. I get really like silly excited about that kind of data collection strategy. But so we use it in lots of different ways. One, we use the quantitative data from public sources to try and share some key insights that folks can use when they're talking about inequities in our community. And like the number of students who don't have a device or internet subscriptions at home, things like that that can be really powerful and useful to folks. We also then can tell stories. So the city of Austin, I'm actually going to give an example, have been organizing these town halls. And the city of Austin folks have been doing digital equity work for a very long time. And they've been organizing these town halls. And they organized one at a public library, especially to try and talk to folks who are unhoused. And we heard a lot of amazing stories in that conversation that don't show up in the large public data sets. And one of the things we did is we asked folks to kind of map a day in the life of someone who's unhoused in relationship to their technology, and definitely found out that power bricks were so vital because folks were needing to go find a public space to be able to charge their devices. They may have had a device, but when do they have access to power to be able to charge it, much less actual access to the internet to use it for any other purpose? So getting those kinds of stories are really important to showing the nuance and the challenges of digital access and how it's so different in different places, for different folks, for different circumstances, for different environments. We hear a lot about the weather too, and that doesn't always show up in big data sets about challenges. So those kinds of things are really powerful in order to be able to explain some of the things we might see in the data, or have other folks tell us what they think is going on in the data, what the data shows, to help folks see the kind of compounding effect as well of digital inequities. And so we use it in lots of different ways, but the stories help really not only help people see the challenge in a different way, perhaps, but also kind of show the compounding effect of these inequities and how they can show up in someone's life.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Walter Fry. I'm also from Charlotte, North Carolina. But I think I'm one of the few private sector folks here. I'm from a company by the name of Conduent, and we provide digital social services and solutions to hospitals, cities, states, etc. And the question I have is for a person like me, and we know this is the right thing to do, but we're also trying to build a business case for this as well. And that business case for us oftentimes comes back to outcomes that are driving through this, that drive benefits to our cities and end users. And what I'd like to understand better is, what are data sources, and are there entities that are doing this work to connect the impact of improving digital equity to the promised outcomes? Access to telehealth, access to digital payments, access to digital services that really do improve health, wealth, welfare, well-being for citizens and individuals. So that's kind of the holy grail for me, to help demonstrate that, not through it's an intuitive thing that we know and believe to be true, but how do we prove it and demonstrate it with data?
And I think too, in a lot of the programs that are out there, they're very specific. And so if you have lots of data, especially in the health space, where you can point to maybe a change for someone, they received a device or a phone number in the data. I don't know what kind of data you have access to, or if you're working with like hospitals that are doing their own internal kinds of digital equity related research. In addition to data stuff, I'd be curious, like what kinds of opportunities are there for folks working in data in the private sector to be able to elevate this topic too, and support organizations who are doing digital equity work and thinking about what those outcomes could be and how do you measure those outcomes, because they're all so specific. The context programs are within are so different sometimes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in addition to the data piece, and working with, like they mentioned, extensions and universities, but the program organizations and clinics and hospitals like community clinics might be doing some really interesting stuff, and what can they do, especially in partnership, to look at their own data.
Hi, kind of piggybacking off of that question. I'm from Meg Martinez from the CEO Action for Racial Equity Fellowship, where we, have the attention of the business community and are always interested in making sure that we are translating the challenges and opportunities to companies, that are interested in digital equity work. And I'm curious, where do you think the private sector can lean in? Speaking for myself and my home organization, we have a huge data science organization, for example. What are the opportunities when you may have a large organization of data scientists, but they're not necessarily familiar with the data sets or digital equity specifically? Are there still ways for them to, participate and help, as opposed to just, cutting a check, et cetera?
I have some ideas too. So I think there are really cool, there's so much public data out there sometimes, and having folks with that kind of skill set for lots of topics, to be able to work together on projects, working with students who might have those skills as well, to connect them, to then partner with a local nonprofit or an organization who's doing work and needs that kind of support, that technical support. And then I think that, I don't know how many of you participated in like a data jam before, but I don't know if there'd be an opportunity for that kind of activity, especially with folks that come with a lot of deep skills in data analysis, and especially like open data sources. I mean, what's out there? I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of possibilities in that space, but being able to connect private sector folks who have those skills to opportunities to use those skills to support organizations who may have a key question they could get answered with that data or report to write.